Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, it's going to be something a bit different. I'm going to be showing you guys a really cool plugin that I've been using for quite some time now, but it's extremely useful for basically any project that you'll be making in Godot, as it's kind of like an internal console, and you can open the window inside of your game window, and then you can execute any commands, view any data as like a live preview, I guess, set up hotkeys, and all sorts of really cool functions that will basically make developing games and debugging about 3.5 million times easier. So I'm going to show you guys the main page, and I have the link to this GitHub repository in the description of the video. So if you're interested, go ahead and click the link and I'll walk you through the install process. So you can see there's all the documentation here. I'm going to be covering a lot of this stuff in the tutorial, but there's still some things that I probably won't get around to as they are kind of like out of the scope of an introduction. But if you want to go ahead and just check out all the documentation, you can also open it. Like here, it has the individual documentation for each tool, and you can also see how the project is structured. So I would go ahead and take a look at that if you're interested. But what we're going to be doing is just downloading this. So you can just go into the code and click the download zip button. Otherwise, if you want to be extra fancy, you can go ahead and just mirror the repository. You have the link to that right here, so you could do that in your main game project folder if you'd like, but we're just going to be installing it with the zip folder. So once you have the zip folder, you can see that I've extracted it right here. We have the Panku Console master folder, and inside of here, all we want is the add-ons folder. So just take the add-ons folder and drag it into your project folder, and this will just go into the root of your project folder, and this way Godot will detect it correctly. But once you've done that, we can go into Godot, just make sure it's all in here, and we just need to enable it. So I've already done this, but that is up in the project settings. Go over to the plugins tab and then make sure it is enabled with the Boolean here. And then you can go ahead and close out of this. Now I'm running this tutorial in 4.2 and I'm on the beta 6, which is not the stable release for 4.2, but it does have a few fixes for loading files. So if you're in a previous version of Godot, you might need to actually restart the editor for the plugin to actually initialize correctly, but I didn't have that problem in this build, so I'm just going to continue with that. But you can see I have like a basic game setup. This just has a ton of, basic things. We have like the player with the camera, and we have an obstacle. And if I go ahead and run this, we can move around. If we collide into the obstacle, we obviously cannot pass it. Now, the cool thing about Panku is everything's going to run inside of your game window with a keybind. So we can go up to the project settings, and I've already defined this in the input map, but just go to the input map, and it's going to look, I'm going to delete this so that you guys can see me adding it, but you're going to just add a new action, and it'll be called Toggle Console. And it needs to be named exactly this so that it will be detected correctly. And then you can obviously just add a keybind for this action, which I'm going to keep it as default. So I'm going to do the left quote, but you can obviously do whatever you want. Click OK. And now if we go ahead and run the game, I'm going to full screen this. If I type the back quotes, it opens this very cool looking window. And this is kind of where all the fun begins because of this little search bar here. This is kind of like an expression bar. So you can basically execute any sort of code or functions from here and manipulate your game however you would want. Now, before we get started, it is very important to note that if this console window is open, by default, it will pause your game. So if I click back into my window, I cannot move the character. But you can actually disable this if you want. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So basically, we're just going to go into the settings icon. We're going to go to interactive shell, and you'll see a couple settings in here. We're just going to uncheck the pause if pop-up, and then we can close this. And now the game will continue to run even if the window is open. Which is kind of nice. You might not want that obviously, but I'm just going to leave it like that. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the expression bar. So this is pretty straightforward. It's essentially exactly how you would execute code in GDScript. So let's say I wanted to basically delete the boundaries of the world so that we could walk wherever we want in the game. I would have to access this bounds node over here and then call queue_free on it, just like you would normally do if you were going to delete the node through code. And you can just do that. So I can just type current, And this is kind of a keyword that's used in Panku, which kind of corresponds to the current scene. And in this case, it would correspond to the world scene. So typing current is the same as world. And this way I don't have to type get root dot get tree dot, get node and then get the world. I can just type current dot get node, and we're going to search for bounds, which is the node that I have. And then I'm going to call queue_free on it. And if I run this, it will delete the boundaries. And now I can obviously move wherever I want. So that's obviously really helpful, because if you can just execute any commands at any time without having to go into like the remote tab and search for your node in here and whatever, you can literally just do it straight from inside of your game. So this is obviously like game changing, like no pun intended, but this is incredible. There's a few more ones I want to cover before we get to the next part. There's a really helpful command, which is just toggling full screen. You can just call this right from the console, and I can just tab into autocomplete this and then select enter, and it will toggle full screen. So typically, if I don't have the settings all, like set up when I am making a game, I can just easily test things out in full screen by searching for full screen, and then, whoops, that's the wrong one. And then boom, it's already in full screen mode, which is really nice. And then additionally, we can use the quit function from Engine Tools and just quit the game from there. Now, what if you want to change the values of a node during runtime? Because you can do that in the remote tab. Like if I wanted to change the movement speed of my player, let's say it was moving too slow, I would go to the remote tab, and then I'd find my player object, and then I'd change maybe the max speed or the acceleration. This would all update live, obviously, for testing, but it's kind of awkward to move around all this. And then also, if you click into this window, you would need to set the gameplay window to always be on top. Otherwise, you have to go down or Alt-Tab into it again, which gets really annoying. But from here, I can just open up the console window, and I can go up to my current, which is my world scene. And then this world scene has an export variable on it, which corresponds to the player node. So I can access the player property straight from there. And now you could either call the set function on here to set the value of the player, or you could just leave it like this. And if you run this line on an object that has export properties, then it will open up this very cool little window, which will basically list all of the export properties on that node. So I just opened up this player window, and you can see we have the max speed, the acceleration, the friction, and all of these can obviously just be changed. So let's say we're testing out our movement. We change the max speed up to like 1000, change the acceleration, or let's change the friction. And now you can see that we're moving a lot differently, and it's that easy to change values. You don't have to go back into the editor. And another really cool thing is you can keep multiple windows up at the same time. So if I just typed current to open the world object, I could have two windows open side by side, and I wouldn't have to keep switching back between nodes in the remote tab to change different values. We're going to go on to the next kind of section of this. So you can see we have all of our tabs on the side. If I open up the menu, we have the debug logs, which this is essentially your output window. So you might have noticed, like in the top, it's printing all of the output to our screen, which is really helpful. You don't have to go look at the output whenever you're printing stuff. You can just stay in the game and see it all as an overlay, which is really nice. But if you want this logger open, you can see all the warnings and errors additionally, and you can obviously like pin stuff and clear stuff, which is kind of helpful. But that's basically it for the native logger. We also have the watch expressions, and this one's pretty interesting. It might be kind of cumbersome to actually set this up initially, but the really cool thing is it saves all of your groups. So basically what this does is you can see that I've added two different expressions that I would like to monitor, and this will monitor them during runtime, which is kind of like a debugger, but obviously built in again. So right now I'm watching the Engine Tools performance info, and I'm also watching the player max speed value. And if I go ahead and run this with the play button, you can see that it returns and displays all of this data. So I can see the FPS, the memory, and the amount of objects, obviously. and then the max speed is 1000, which we changed earlier. But let's say you had a more complicated scene setup and you wanted to monitor like a specific object. I could just add a new group here, and then inside of here I could just rename it with the little button on the side to, let's say it was like an enemy object, and then I could just keep adding different expressions. And these kind of work the same as the input expressions here, where it's just a function or like a method you're essentially calling, and it will basically print the value that it returns directly under the expression. So a lot of flexibility here. Like if I was to print the like the HP of something, let's say I didn't have a lot set up, or maybe I wanted to print like some more internal variables just to track things, just a basic debugger. But it also supports really interesting things like just basic math. So if I was to print like 12 plus 4 and then run this one, it just prints 16. And you can also do things like call a function on this, so we can convert it to a Boolean and then convert this to an equals. And 12 does not equal 4, so it is returning false. So again, this is another just very helpful component of this plugin, which can be utilized very easily and is, again, just mind-boggling how helpful this kind of stuff is. But I'm going to go to the next kind of component here. So we're going to go to the shortcut tab, and this one's really quick. It's just keyboard shortcuts. So if I was to add something basic, which is an expression again, just like we've been doing with the console tab and the watch tab. Let's say I made an expression which was just print, and then maybe just print like hello world to the screen. And then I can just bind this to any key I want. So we'll say like T. And then whenever I click T, it'll print this. So maybe I wanted to like remember where the player's position was on the map. I could just add a new one, an expression that gets the current dot player dot global position, and then just make sure to print this so that it is actually a command. And then if I press the T key, it will print the global position. It's printing it on the screen right now, but again, just open the debug logs and we can see that it's printing the global position right there. And then there's a couple more things we have. We have the history, obviously. So this is just kind of a log of all the commands we've run. And then there are a couple more things we have. So obviously you can go into the settings and you have all this stuff to work with. A lot of this stuff, like the native logger, you can change the settings for this, but we've already kind of worked with that. With the history manager, we looked at that. The engine tools, this is kind of just some buttons that have been put in here. And then we have keyboard shortcuts, which we've already looked at. You can check for updates here if you want. We have the shell, which is what we've already been interacting with kind of the whole video. And then down here, we just have the general settings, which you can obviously change like the color of the windows and a bit more. Now, there is a setting in here that I want to cover, and this will kind of be the last part of this video, but this enable OS window. And if we toggle this, then we get a button on every one of these windows, which will basically pop it out into its own floating window, and then it won't be contained inside of the game. So I'm going to drag this over here, and if I pop this out, we just get this extra floating window here. And you can just throw these up like wherever you want, and you don't have to take up your prime real estate inside of your game window. So that's about it for this showcase. Now, again, it's really important to note that I did not make this plugin. I simply found it and figured it's like the best plugin I've ever seen for Godot, and it's definitely the most helpful for a broad range of projects. So I wanted to show you guys. But just remember, all the credit goes to ARC 2000 and all the contributors down here for making this happen. This is definitely a very, very helpful tool, and I think they all deserve a lot more credit. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks again for watching. And if you want to see more Godot related content, you can go ahead and subscribe, and that really supports the channel and helps me out a lot. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.